So gonna move on to our next speaker, who is Dermot Hughes, who's going to talk to us all about design tokens.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Louise. I never use Zoom. I always forget where the share button is. There we go, the big green one. Okay, so I'm Dermot. I'm a UX engineer, bizarre voice, technically like a front end engineer, but I always tend to brand myself more as a UX engineer, mainly because if anyone's familiar with like Chris Coye's like blog from a few years ago, The Great Divide, he sort of talks about front end engineering and the front of the front end and the back of the front end, and I always see myself as more the front of the front end, which sort of leads on to this whole concept of what I'm going to be talking about here, which is what the fuck are design tokens. So I mean, just as a like general curiosity, like how many people on the call have actually heard of design tokens before? Like if you just chucked in the chat or said something, or I don't really given a reaction. Let's see, unfortunately, I also don't know how to get the chat. Chris, did anyone answer?
He did with his hands. It was like, eh.
I've heard of them, but I don't know what they actually are.
Good, yeah. Well, then hopefully this will fill you on a bit. It's kind of, I mean, a concept has come into the forefront the past like maybe 2 years or so, but a lot of people it's still really new and fresh. So it's a really interesting sort of thing to be getting into. So I'll start off with where did it come from. So design tokens was invented. It's the whole sort of concept, I think it was around 2017 at Salesforce. And they describe it as design tokens are the visual design atoms of the design system. So what does that actually mean? So let's use this example. So this is my lovely button. So if you're designing, so I work on Bizarre Voice in the design systems team. So we're building out all these sort of components for other teams to then use. So we have buttons and inputs and modals and all that we would all write out in React, define them all, do a lot of edge case testing, have everything all styled the way it should be to fit in with the branding. And then other teams don't have to worry about a lot of this stuff. So we're able to give them things like all the visual side of it, accessibility, all that sort of good stuff, responsiveness, so they can worry about business logic and all that kind of side of things. So when you're talking about like design atoms, it's best to think, at least from a web developer point of view, is sort of CSS properties. So if you're making out a button, what makes this a button as opposed to a different element? So like in here, you would have obviously the colors are the first thing that probably jumps out. So you have a background color. You've got your text, and that text is going to have a color, a font family, font weight, letter spacing, line height, font size. You can have a border that's going to have a color and a width, border radius, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the sort of design atoms that make up something. So the lowest levels, so if you're familiar with Brad Frost, his concept of atomic design, which typically starts before like atoms, molecules, up as you build a more complicated application. But this is sort of like a subatomic level. So if we go on, so this is the sort of thing if you're writing, so this is actually how that button is written is in JSX. So you'd just pass in a bunch of CSS styles, but you could also just write it more traditionally, HTML, CSS, and you got your background color, border. That's not even all the elements that make that up, things like font family and all is being inherited. So what happens when you come to a rebrand time? So this is all been hard coded, and suddenly somebody comes along and says, right, we're doing a whole big rebrand. Christmas is coming, so we're going to go and get rid of this brand yellow. That's and in comes Christmas red. So this is actually an apt quote from Chris Goya again of CSS Tricks. was talking about custom properties and using them just a few days ago. But he mentioned about this is color spacing, fonts and whatnot. You set them at the root of the page, you use them throughout your CSS. Very useful. And the classic use case for not only custom properties, but for preprocessor variables to last 1 million years. So that's probably a lot of you are thinking if you're familiar with something like Sass or less, or more modern uses of just custom properties. So what do? You might do this something. So as Chris had said, for the past million years, we've been doing this since Sass and less and CSS preprocessors have come in, is you set variables at the top of the file, or you import them from somewhere else. They're defined. You give yourself a Sass variable, so Christmas red. Then you can assign your button background color that, so you have a bit of scalability, and you set that in your background color. So background color is button, which is Christmas red, which is this. Cool. So you could even go even further than that, like more modern. If you're not having to support old browsers like IE, you can deal with just custom properties or CSS variables, which can really add a lot of power to it, because you can do it in real time. You don't have to have everything compiled, and you can go do the whole hog. So not just background colors. So you want to do every single property set as a variable. So brilliant. We've got our button now. We've changed our colors. We've got our Christmas theme. So you're thinking, where these are just variables. What's new about this? We've been doing this for years. And that's where we come to. So Gina Ann, was one of the designers at Salesforce who came up with the concept of design tokens, and she says better than me. So design tokens are methodology. So in my honest opinion, saying design tokens are just variables, it's like saying responsive design is just media queries. It's a technology agnostic architecture and process for scaling design across multiple platforms, devices, including even more. So that's the key word really there, is design tokens are technology agnostic. So why do you need that? What's important about that? You're probably not updating one thing. So in our example, we had just a color, but you're going to be doing more than that, and you're going to forget something. So I'm sure some of you have used something along this. So you might have like a whole brand scale, color palettes, all that sort of thing, sitting in a design tool somewhere, whether it's Figma or Sketch, or so sitting on InVision somewhere. You've got your brand colors, you've got brand styles all set. And so if a rebrand comes along, you're going to have to go, the designer and design team is going to have to change all of these. They're going to have to all be updated manually. So our yellows would have to become our reds here. You've got, you could be using style components in React. So you're having to import them. So you've got your styles sitting somewhere inside your code base, that somebody is going to have to go in, update them, talk to your designers, and update all these styles. You could be using Android for some app. I know absolutely nothing about Android or native development, but this is just copied off Stack Overflow, but this seems to be making a button. So this pull in hexes. So again, this could have a completely different format, completely different style, but you're still going to have to go and get a style guide and manually change all this. So you've got lots and lots of tech stacks. And this could apply whether you are a big organization that has a strict brand guidelines and lots of different stacks. Like, you're going to be very, very lucky if you're a team that every single application and project you run all runs in the same stack and the same thing. I'm sure everybody's got some ancient WordPress website hidden somewhere, or something on ASP.NET, or you're trying to deal with that. But also if you're an agency, you might be interested in this because you may be changing the style for every single client, but how many times do you need to rebuild a button or a modal before you're like, I've done this a million times, there's got to be an easier way. So what you need is a single source of truth. And this is what Wayne and Garth here are bound towards almighty JSON. But this could be anything. Typically it's done in JSON. You could put, if you want to use YAML or something as well. But this is the basis of a design token. So this is technology agnostic. Nearly anything it's going to be able to take in a JSON file and be able to read it. So you've got a color and you've got a primary, and you set your hex. It doesn't have to be a hex. It could be RGBA or HSLA or whatever you need it to be. But that's the idea, that you have a base token. So why would you need that later then? So I think we can all relate to this. It covers you for the future as well. So it doesn't matter if you are using Angular or React or Vue or Svelte or whatever the next shiny framework that comes along, it's probably going to be able to use JSON. So it's a pretty safe bet for scalability and a bit of future proofing, which is quite rare in front end. And another thing is it creates a sort of shared language between designers and developers. As I said before, I like to sit sort of in between and bridge that gap as a sort of front end developer. So I'm sure the designers in the call can relate to this. You can make the most detailed style guide ever, and the developers just completely ignore it and end up hard coding some general vague hex that has nothing to do with what you had set, and it's all a complete mess. But being able to say you're using brand primary is just an easy agnostic word that doesn't matter in technology, and everyone can agree what this value is. So if we go on to the actual tokens, then we've got our JSON. So the idea is that you're storing these, so quite basic. So the way they work is you just have the sort of nest. Now there are different sort of ideas. It's because it's not quite mature, but generally the idea is like to group it at the top level by like your category. So this could be color or typography or spacing. And then below that, you would have your sort of types of it. So you group all your yellows together, all your reds together, all your blues together. And then you might have a scale similar to that screenshot from Figma earlier of your palettes. And that has a value. So the base level, you're defining your little tiniest, most simple sort of thing. So this is where you set your actual hex colors, your actual spacing scale, or your typography scale. This is where you actually input the values. But you wouldn't necessarily use these directly anywhere. So a level up from that is what you would call an alias token. And the idea is this sort of gives context to these base tokens. So in this case, like a call to action. So your call to actions, now the reason I haven't used button there is call to action is you can have a primary color for a button or a checkbox or a radio button or anything you sort of interact. And across a theme, they may all have a primary color or secondary color. And then the value of that, rather than you hard coding here, is referencing a yellow 100. So you can sort of move these around and create different themes really easily by just moving around your colors, your spacing. And then at the deepest level of your component is where you would create your component tokens. So this is specific to a component. So in our case, the buttons, you've got button, primary, background, and that would be your call to action or your padding. So in this case, we've got button padding left, and that's using a default sort of like padding. So you can imagine how you've kind of lots of different states or variants of a button: hover states and active states and disable states and secondary and primary and tertiary, but they're all going to share the same padding probably. So with just one token, you could really quickly update. So that's the sort of basic logic to having a three-tiered sort of system in it. But this can then be applied to lots and lots of different things. So this is a non-exhaustive list of things that you could tokenize. So you've got background colors and type colors, margin padding. You could do border colors, letter spacings, border radius, animation typings, media queries. All these sort of things can kind of be condensed down into key value pairs that you can then apply to whatever you need. So the general idea is that this is a great sort of diagram by Specify App. They're like a tool that works with design tokens. But the idea is that you have your design tokens somewhere. So your designers sit together. We're at Bazaar Voice, we're now starting to use Figma, which is a fantastic tool for this sort of thing because it's got a great API and you can spit all this out. So all the design are made visually in tools, all your colors, all your spaces, etc. And they then use this. So you would create a repo somewhere that stores all this JSON that you could then interact with your design tool. So you're able to create them and then feed them back so that you could update a token for, say, the background button, the background color for your buttons is somewhere in this JSON, and your design tool would feed that back down and change all your buttons. But this JSON can then be spit out into all the text-specific formats that you need it to be. So for the web, you can maybe using the examples I've given earlier, you have JSON or CSS or Sass, JSS, Tailwind. On iOS or on Android, you've got JSON or XML or whatever the new hotness is. And then you can feed that in directly into your app. So how do you convert these tokens? How do you actually get them from JSON into whatever you need them to be in? And this is where Style Dictionary comes in. Now there are a few tools going around. The other big one is Theo, which is the one that originally came from Salesforce, but I've been using Style Dictionary. It's created by Amazon. It's been pretty well maintained. It's in its 3rd version now, and they're always releasing new sort of updates for it. So it's pretty well supported. How am I doing for time, Chris? Do a quick demo.
We did start a timer when you started speaking, so as long as you're okay for time, we'll be great. We're ahead of schedule, so
cool. I'll really quickly go through this. And so this is somebody who's a Div Riots have made a sort of playground for Style Dictionary. So Style Dictionary itself is actually I'll come off full screen. Oh. Style Dictionary itself is actually here. Amazon, GitHub, you'll find it really quickly if you search for Style Dictionary. But it's an npm package, and I assume Yarn as well. But the basic idea of it is there's really good docs for showing it. But you'd install this locally on your project. But I will quickly show. So this is just an example of what would happen is you could have a card with a border with a radius. So this is your sort of component level that I was talking about that then inherits up values from somewhere else. So for example, the border radius of the card is using radii.sm.value. So that's like a level up. This is your sort of alias or your base level tokens. So 8 pixels. So I can change 80 pixels and this will update to the format required for your app. But the real powerful thing is if I go quickly, so this is just some example configs. So you can kind of see, I don't know, it might be pretty small, but this is the config file that you can pass and use with Style Dictionary, but you can give it like Android and iOS and all this good stuff, and it'll handle all the heavy lifting for you. So if I change this, it's not going to be exactly right, but save. So down here, so this has now converted. So remember, we've here just specified to 80 pixels. And in our colors, we've got some hex values in here. But if we go into what files have actually been outputted, so in Android, it's an XML format, and it has renamed the names. So it's now color base gray, all formatted to underscore names, and it's put it into the long format for that hex that they use. In Compose, it's created them as an object with vals and a color and this long hex thing for that. So it's converted to the format required for that. On iOS, it's required into the big long RGBA alpha thing, and with all the sort of required, so you can just literally pull this into your project, and you get the point. Again, there's some other iOS ones. There's Sass, Hex, and if you can also manually config these. So if you would prefer to use HSLA or RGBA, at some point you can convert them. But there we go. Yeah, you can also write custom ones. So say Style Dictionary doesn't have one, you can write your own. So in this case, I've written is font sizing. So there's 2 levels to it. So this is the actual transform. So in this case, it's converting pixel values to rems for typography. So you don't have to ever. So typically, it's easier to think in pixels, and designers like to think in pixels instead of thinking in rems. But obviously, you want to give relative units to the end user on the web. So rather than having to convert it and worrying about, is the designer going to do it, or they're just going to put, or is the engineer going to put in pixels or back and forth, you just don't have to think about it. So you can write a matcher. So in this case, it's on font sizing, and that's checking just if it's a font size or line height or letter spacing. That sort of token. So whenever it's generating all these tokens, if it finds one of these tokens, it will convert it. It'll assume you can either pass in an option with a base pixel size, or otherwise it'll assume 16, and it'll convert that to a rem and spits out nice tasty rems for everyone to use. Keeps everything nice and accessible. But yeah, that's pretty much me. I've just sort of blasted through that one. Really good resource for this sort of stuff. Somebody has made an awesome design tokens GitHub repo, which is basically a compilation of everything you ever need to read about design tokens. So we've got the official working group, live sites that use it, GitHub repos, lots of articles on what are design tokens and how to use them, tools. So there's style dictionaries, Theo I mentioned, lots of plugins for like getting it to work with Figma. So that's one of the real strengths we're doing in the minute. BV is we're having our design, all the components and everything being spec'd out, and the design tokens created by the designers on Figma that are then spinning out to a GitHub repo where they're automatically being picked up by GitHub Actions that generates all our tokens, and then a designer is able to essentially make a pull request that an engineer signs off. It gets merged in, and that gets published to an NPM package, all pretty much automatically. And so a designer is on Figma is able to make a change, and it can get reflected into an application. So it's really, really powerful stuff. But yeah, that's me. Any questions?
Awesome, thank you very much, Dermot. It was very, very interesting. Very relatable to me at the minute. Like our team is literally deploying a new color palette across all of our products, all from one single design system. And as you can imagine, it is a very fun experience for everybody involved. But yeah, no, we have a couple of questions that come through here. Probably more similar to questions like, like this is awesome and future proof, but when does that get outweighed by like this is so abstract, and how can we teach this to like junior developers and people getting in the industry?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest sort of challenges we're finding at the minute is educating teams on using them. At the minute I mean, obviously any team can utilize this. At the minute, we're focusing on our design system team to be able to tokenize everything. And although we'll be giving the tokens available for other teams to consume, for the most part, they don't need to directly use it. So the idea is you can really easily build out a component and not have to think about it. So we're trying to, like, the less sort of cognitive load from an engineer when they're writing it, they're able to just go, I'm making a button. So I know the variable is going to be button. You can use autocomplete and everything in your editor that can kind of bring a lot of the stuff in, but it's trying to get a good schema. So let me, oh, I forgot, I wasn't sharing my screen. There is a good style dictionary. CTI, they're still trying to agree on the best way to like arrange the tokens. Is it going to give it to me? Probably not. This is the one thing the docs aren't great for when you actually need to find something, which is config, package structure, architecture. Tokens.
I think from the looks of the docs, it's already answering the question that it is an upper curve for people getting into this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's trying to get, that's why we're trying to limit it at the minute within the design team before we share it out with everybody else. Like we're finding challenges even. I mean, like it's really powerful and really empowering to have a designer be able to make a change and push it down in code, but it means you have to have the designer educated on branch strategy and commit messages, and so there is definitely a bit of a learning curve with it, but yeah, it's a tricky one. One of the things we're actually doing at the minute is trying to write custom linters. So when the team's using styling, so if somebody tries to define hard code, say a color or a padding, the linter will pick it up and go, hey, you should use a token for this, and then suggest it. So that's in the works. It's anything that can kind of, without making, because developers don't read docs unless they really have to. So
that's fair. So that leads into another question we had. Like when we think about tokens, we think of them like there's button background color or button text. If the color hex value for button text is the same that you use for, say, like your link text or your nav bar header text, is that a separate token, or do you reuse the token? Do you share tokens across different purposes?
Yeah, so that's what the whole 3-tiered system is for, is you have your base level token is the actual key value pair for defining a color, or so you would have a limited set of in your palette. You would have a limited spacing scale, a limited typography scale, that sort of thing. So everything should sort of fit into those. Then you've got your alias level, which is where you would set, so that's sort of where you create your theme in terms of adding like actual semantics, meaning what was a good example? Adobe design tokens alias. So Adobe can do something that they're one of the ones that are using it. Come on, here we go. So I'll zoom that up really quick. So the idea is that, say for a button, so you've got a hex, and that hex is actually blue 400. Is that one? That is definitely the right one. Yeah. So you wouldn't, so for a button, you would have a button. The idea is that you'd set your variable to the base level, your middle level, the alias is where you give it sort of semantic reasoning. So a call to action, or like small, medium, large spaces. And then the component token, the idea is that you never need to change the component. So component would be like a one-to-one relation for every style property it has. So a button primary background color, button primary color, button primary radius, border radius, they would never actually change. So you could actually lift that written component in React or whatever it is with those style properties, and you could apply it to any like brand, or so if you were white labeling an app, for example, or if you're an agency where you want to like reuse components, you'd never change the component, because all you could do is really quickly theme. Say you're creating a dark mode, you can really quickly like flip the properties then.
Oh yeah, no, that's really good.
It's tricky to get your head around. It took me about 2 months.
Yeah, like as I said before, I think like I know nothing about tokens, and I know a little bit about tokens. I think this one's I think there was another question where I think it's directed potentially toward the style dictionary. So like as similar like I think it's like similar / different styles between platforms. are there like restrictions or like different styles that can't be applied? Like I'm not 100% versed in like, you know, Android versus like a React app such as React Native app. Can you share the styles across all these platforms and maintain that?
Not everything. So that that list I have there is, you're not going to have every single CSS property. And I know like I think native apps tend to handle like borders differently to like you would in CSS. Like my experiences with like a web developer, front and foremost, I've pretty much no experience in native apps, so I can't exactly say how much it transfers over, but there is a lot of stuff that does transfer for basic things like spacing and colors, as we've seen in that example in here. Like you can see all the different formats that are spit out for like a color, but those are the basic core things that make up a rebrand or a theme. Whenever someone thinks of a rebrand, you're thinking colors and typography. So it's not going to cover every single base. Like there's going to be stuff like, I don't know, one earlier, cursor pointer, you know, when on a button, you know, or a call to action or something, you want to turn it into the little pointy hand thing. Like that's not going to apply to a touch device. So not everything is going to be one-to-one, but you can get quite a way there.
Awesome, thank you, Ross. That was a very, very interesting talk. There's a lot to take away from that.